I have something important to tell you.
It's over. We are screwed.
Lean in closer. Come here. Gather round.
Are you close enough yet? Can you hear me? Are you ready for this? I am planning to do lesbian acts to your mother.
That is both a threat and a promise. I'm just kidding. It's neither of those. It's just a regular thing that I say to people all the time as part of my regular vulgar personality. And this is something that was not considered in the book Word Slut by Amanda Montell, which greatly frustrated me and made an otherwise very fantastic book just a little bit less than fantastic to me. I think I'm going to give this book 3.5 stars. It would have been a solid 5 stars to me if Amanda had acknowledged my capability of doing lesbian sex with all of your moms. And we're going to get into why in just a moment.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should pick up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I am Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business. Or if you're new, welcome for the first time. If this is your first time here, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to ring the little notification bell, because multiple times a week I put out new videos about books and business, and today's video is going to be all about books. It is in fact going to be a book review. Just a couple weeks ago, I did a review of the book Cultish by Amanda Montell, which is one of the books that we read for Your Morning Guru Book Club. By the way, if you're not already subscribed to my second channel, Your Morning Guru, that is linked in the description below as well. That is my live streaming channel where every single morning during the weekdays at 7 a.m. Central Time, I host a live show with my friend where we talk about a lot of the similar topics we talk about on this channel: books, business, roasting business gurus, anti-MLM stuff, all of that. Except we do that as a live stream every single day, and we have a monthly book club where we read both Cultish and Amanda Montell's other book, Word Slut, which is what we're going to be reviewing today. After I did my review of Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, which was also Your Morning Guru Book Club book, in case you were wondering about that. That was also, so you want to get involved in our book club. We read a lot of good books there. But after reviewing that book on this channel, I got a lot of feedback from people saying, Savvy, please review some positive books. Please give us some recommendations. Don't just tell us what books you hate. Tell us what books you love.
Not fighting what we hate. Saving what we love.
So I decided to do some positive book reviews for a change, and that's what led me to reviewing Cultish, which a lot of people liked, and a lot of people said, Savvy, please review Word Slut as well. So that's what we are going to do today as well. I did mention in my review of Cultish that I loved the book Cultish a lot, and that I also really liked Word Slut, although I didn't like it as much as I liked Cultish. So today's review is going to be a little bit of a mixed bag. It's going to be largely positive, and I am going to be recommending the book because I do highly suggest that everyone read it. I think it was definitely a worthwhile read. However, I do have a couple criticisms that we will get into as well. So let's get into it. First of all, what is this book Word Slut about, and what is the title Word Slut? Savvy, aren't you a word slut because you're always acting horny on main and talking about how much you love writing and editing and stuff? Yeah, you know what? I guess I would be a word slut. So I guess this book was targeted at me personally, and maybe that's why I enjoyed it. But let's talk about what the book's about. Alright, so here from the author, Amanda Montell's website, is a description of Word Slut. The word bitch conjures many images for many people, but it is most often meant to describe an unpleasant woman. Even before its usage to mean a female canine, bitch didn't refer to gender at all. It originated as a gender-neutral word meaning genitalia. A perfectly innocuous word devolving into a female insult is the case for tons more terms, including hussy, which simply meant housewife, or slut, which meant an untidy person and was also used to describe men. These words are just a few among history's many English slurs hurled at women. Amanda Montell, reporter and feminist linguist, deconstructs language from insults and cursing, gossip and catcalling, to grammar and pronunciation patterns to reveal the ways it has been used for centuries to keep women and other marginalized genders from power. Ever wonder why so many people are annoyed when women talk with a vocal fry or use the word like as a filler? Or why certain gender-neutral terms stick and others don't? Or where stereotypes of how women and men speak come from in the first place? Montell's irresistible humor shines through, making linguistics not only approachable, but both downright hilarious and profound, demonstrated in chapters such as slutty skanks and nasty dykes, a comprehensive list of gendered insults I hate but also kind of love. Women didn't ruin the English language, they invented it. Fuck it, an ode to cursing while female. Montell effortlessly moves between history and popular culture to explore these questions and more. Word Slut gets to the heart of our language, marvels at its elasticity, and sheds much-needed light into the biases that shadow women in our culture and our consciousness. So, Absolutely my kind of book. The subtitle on this book is even A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language, which, as you guys know, on this channel, I'm always talking about, feminist topics, LGBTQ rights and things like that, but also language and grammar and how that all intersects with it. So this book was definitely speaking to me directly, even with its title. However, that doesn't mean I loved everything about it. So let's get into everything. So first of all, I loved that this book was very research-based and delved into a lot of historical evolutions of language and really showed how language evolved from one place to the next. As a writer myself, I find that kind of stuff endlessly fascinating. I could talk about that kind of thing all day. So listening to that and learning the roots of certain words I thought was really, really interesting. One of the main things that stuck in my mind was how certain insults come to be. So for example, she talks about the word bitch and the word dick as two examples of words in the English language that have really stuck over the centuries, over generations. Those insults tend to stick where others might change with the slang of the time. Why do those insults tend to stick? Well, it's theorized that it could be that when we are young and we're first learning to speak, it's very natural and primal for humans to make these very hard consonant sounds with our mouths, that we just want to make these sounds that are like d, like sounds like that, as opposed to softer sounds or more vowel sounds and things like that, that those hard consonant sounds just really give our mouths something satisfying to do when we speak, which is why a word like dick is something that has lasted throughout generations, because you want to call someone a dick, it's just really satisfying to feel those consonant sounds in your mouth. It really has that bite to it. So I like how she broke down the phonemes angle of this, I guess, the way that the words feel in our mouths, and connected that to sort of to human evolution, not in an extremely scientific way, but started to get into that a little bit, and I liked seeing those connections drawn. I really like when books draw explicit connections of how things got to be a certain way, because as I've talked about before on this channel, I do tend to view the world very literally, so whenever someone tries to give me something where I have to go on an implication, or I have to go based on a certain social cue that I might not have picked up on, that can get really frustrating. So when she says, like, yes, a word like this has lasted generations, and it's because we like to make these hard consonant sounds, they feel good in our mouths, there's something related to being human, I find that interesting. I love it. I love listening to things like that. I also thought it was interesting, kind of on that same note of me being someone who tends to take things very literally, I also found it interesting just to learn that a lot of these words were gendered slurs in the first place. And a lot of people might be like, Savvy, you're being an idiot. Obviously everyone knew that slut was a misogynistic word. Like, people had told me that, but I never really felt it, because I've always called men sluts too. I call women sluts, I call men sluts, I call myself a slut, I call my dog a slut. Like, it never really occurred to me that there was anything gendered about it, because even when I'd be using it in a way to mean like someone promiscuous, I would say like, oh, that guy's out here being a slut. Like, I would just say that the same way I would say it about myself if I was acting promiscuous and horny on men like I do every single day of my life. So it just never really clicked with me that there was supposed to be something gendered about it. Like, people would tell me there was, but I figured, oh, maybe people are just reading too much into it. But this book really did go into the history of how it became a gendered slur in the first place, and it really took you through the history of how everything came to be. Additionally, I've heard this concept before spread through like manosphere type guys and red pillars and things like that, where people will say like, people expect that it's okay if men are really promiscuous, but if women are promiscuous, people don't like that. Now, a lot of men's rights type of people will be saying that from the perspective of, I truly believe this to be true, I can be promiscuous and you can't. A lot of women will say this from the perspective of, it's really not fair how society thinks it's okay for men to be promiscuous but not women. I, as someone who takes the world very literally and is shit at picking up on social cues, have never experienced that. I've just been promiscuous when I wanted to, and if men were promiscuous and I thought it was weird, I would tell them they were weird for it. If they wasn't weird, I would not shame them. You know what I'm saying? My point is that gender never factored into the way I personally perceived it, or really understood that other people were perceiving it, because that was generally something that was unspoken rather than stated outright. So I always had a little trouble with that. But then I liked how this book actually delved into, yes, this is an actual thing, and here's kind of where it stems from. There's this idea that as people were going from overwhelmingly nomadic cultures to a lot of human civilizations being groups that kind of lived in one place as opposed to more nomadic groups, a lot of times people got into this whole idea of owning land and passing down land and knowing who could inherit other people's property. There became much more of an emphasis on having physical property, and when that became a thing, well, people needed to know for certain who were their biological children. Okay, well, if a woman is cheating with lots of men, then you can't know for sure whose biological children they are. You always will know who the biological mother is, but not necessarily the father. But if a man is cheating with lots of women and he knows who he slept slept with and the woman will give birth to the child, you know who the mother is. So you'll never call that into question, if that makes sense. So there was the standard that came from that where it's like, okay, people need to become monogamous so that they can pass down land. And if women are the ones not being monogamous, it's going to be more difficult for property to be passed down. And I'm sure that that's not the only reason. I'm sure it's much more multifaceted than that. But again, I thought it was interesting that she delved into the why in that case. I love it when books delve into the why and the how and go into, okay, this happened, but why did this happen? But what caused that to happen? Taking causes back as far as you can possibly go. I absolutely love that in books, and I thought she did a fabulous job breaking that down here and exploring some of the possible causes rather than just saying, well, socially that's how it is and you have to pick up on that, and if you're neurodivergent, fuck you. Like, it wasn't like that at all, and I really appreciated that about this book. Another part I loved was she talked about, as the description kind of said, she talked about how certain patterns became associated with femininity in the English language and how those things ended up getting a negative connotation to them. Whereas when linguists have actually studied those patterns, it's been found that that isn't actually the connotation that's meant to go with it. So for example, women saying the word like a lot, or women saying you know a lot in sentences, a lot of people have said, okay, well, women, you need to cut that out of your language because it's making you sound uncertain. It's making you sound casual when you should be sounding professional. But in reality, when linguists have actually studied groups of women who employ these vocal patterns, a lot of times it was shown that they were doing this as a way to invite more collaboration. When they say, you know, it wasn't just meant to be like, you know, I'm not totally confident, so I'm asking you if you know. It was instead meant to be, you know, you're saying to someone else to invite them to participate back towards you in the conversation, and that these patterns had actually been passed down for a long time culturally as a way for women to invite collaboration with one another within language. So these patterns weren't meant to show uncertainty or insecurity or a lack of intelligence, but rather they were an accurate tool that was shown to be effective when getting women to participate with one another in a conversation. So I thought that was interesting, and it was one of those things where it talked about, you know, I'm just saying you know everywhere. I think that's because I'm Midwestern. But the book kept saying things like that, and a lot of people will say things like, women, you need to cut these words out of your vocabulary if you want to sound professional. And this book kind of makes the argument that, well, maybe not necessarily. If a lot of women talk this way, chances are culturally and evolutionarily there was some advantage to doing that, and let's explore what some of those advantages might be, and let's talk about why maybe men in power just need to get over the fact that some women talk that way and accept that they're getting by on their own intelligence and their own merit and not judge them by the way that they speak. And I thought that was an interesting antidote to the normal feminist messaging that we see. This was a kind of a different take on it, and I appreciated that. There was one line in that whole section that I really loved. She was like, hey ladies, have you ever been told to stop apologizing? And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, now that you mention it, I think I have. And this book actually made the argument that women apologizing, once again, was part of that collaborative nature of speaking to one another and shouldn't be taken as the fact that women are trying to take blame for everything or a sign of weakness or anything like that. Basically, it was applying a new lens to viewing the ways that women communicate and interact, and I found that extremely interesting. Now let's talk about the lesbian sex I'm gonna have with all your moms and the one part I didn't really appreciate in this book. And I'm just gonna go on a rant, and this is probably a me personally rant, so if you guys didn't take it this way in this book and you disagree, that is totally 100% valid. This is just a personal savvy rant that I'm going on because this is my channel and I tend to do that.
I just have a lot of feelings.
There's this part where she talks about the chapter on swearing, and I believe it was called Fuck It, an Ode to Cursing While Female. It was that chapter. So she's in that chapter, and she's talking about how a lot of swear words and swearing phrases tend to be fairly masculine coded. And an example she gives is how people say suck my dick as a swear. Like, if you don't literally want someone to suck your dick necessarily, you don't even have to have a dick to say it. A lot of times, just as a general insult, you might say to someone, suck my dick. And you're not actually offering to have sex with them. You're saying suck my dick as a way to be like, I am having power over you in this sexual act. And it's also not meant to be like a threat of SA. It's a casual phrase that we all use when we're swearing. Maybe not all of us. There's probably a lot of polite people in the comments who are like, I never say suck my dick to people. That's very rude. I say it all the time. I'll tell people suck my dick. And she makes the argument, you know, that's a very masculine coded phrase. Why don't we equally say things like lick my clit? Because originally she'd be like, you could say eat my pussy, but the reason we would say suck my dick over eat my pussy when talking to someone is that our mouths are more tailored towards... It sounds like I'm about to be like, our mouths are tailored towards sucking dick. That's not what I'm about to say. I'm not actually talking about oral sex here. Is that our mouths are very tailored towards saying these hard consonant sounds, right? So we're like, suck my dick, right? That's something that's very satisfying in the mouth. You say eat, the word eat, that's not a lot of hard consonant sounds in there. It starts with a vowel. Saying the word pussy, there isn't really any k sound in there, and that's a sound is the main consonant. Like, that doesn't have the same satisfying effect that's gonna last generations like suck my dick would. So she says we should start saying suck my clit to each other. So if you guys don't like this video, you can all suck my clit. Boom! So I did agree with that part. I did think that there are certain swearing phrases that are masculine coded, such as suck my dick. And that a lot of times we don't naturally think to go to a more feminine coded phrase and instead default to the masculine one, which could be a sign that people still do view men and masculinity as more of a default and women as somewhat of an other. And I think that there is some merit to that because the way that we speak has a lot of influence on all of us. The part I didn't agree with was when she gave another example and she said that saying a phrase like, I'm gonna fuck your mom, that saying that was masculine coded. She's like, that's a masculine coded phrase when you say things like suck my dick or I'm gonna fuck your mom.
That's all I needed for him to do that, and it became personal with me.
Because those things, if they're to be taken literally, can only happen from the perspective of a cisgender man. And I'm like, that is not true, Amanda, because when I threaten to fuck people's moms in casual conversation, when someone says something and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna fuck your mom. When someone's rude in my comments and I'm like, well, it's because I fucked your mom last night. I say that kind of stuff all the time. I act like a 12-year-old on Xbox Live. Xbox Live didn't even exist when I was 12.
But you know, time would move a lot faster. We had an Xbox.
And I'm still over here acting like that kind of person, right? So I'll do that kind of thing all the time. But I'm like, Amanda, were you under the impression that when I say I'm gonna fuck your mom to people, that I'm saying that in this form with my ephemeral penis, that I'm talking about like my theoretical dick that I'm going to plunge into your mother? No, I'm saying that I want to do lesbian acts to your mom. And I actually find it quite sexist that Amanda did not consider that me saying I want to fuck your mom is from a lesbian angle.
What are you doing? I'm looking for more lesbian artifacts.
Okay, Amanda, like, legitimately I did find that a little sexist, because I was like, okay, I can gather suck my dick being masculine coded, okay? But I'm gonna fuck your mom, there is no reason whatsoever that you would assume that was from a cisgender man's perspective, because moms fuck other women all the time. Lesbian MILFs in the chat, drop your name below, slide into my DM. That's a joke. Unless you're offspring is someone who's regularly rude to me in the comments, then do it. That'll be funny. So anyway, I was like, no, I'm gonna fuck your mom is not a masculine coded phrase. I could also say I'm gonna fuck your dad. I don't know why. I guess you could say from that perspective that it's like still in an objectifying women perspective, saying I'm gonna fuck your mom, that people don't usually threaten to fuck people's dads in the same way, because once again, it's from the objectifying women perspective that makes the swearing phrase more powerful, I guess. So I guess that's a valid argument, but claiming that I have to be having a man's perspective to want to fuck your mom is not true, Amanda, not true whatsoever. The other thing in this book that I won't say I had an issue with, but I think could have been improved on a lot, was that I think this book did a great job of presenting a lot of research and information, but I think there were some parts where it didn't bridge certain gaps where people might not already agree with something. Like if you didn't come into the book already agreeing that a certain idea was important or we needed to adopt a certain way of speaking, then the book isn't necessarily always going to convince you. And let me explain what I mean here. So when I read books, when I watch TV, when I do whatever, when I consume nonfiction media, I try to look at it both from my own perspective and then also try to take on the perspective of someone who has a completely different viewpoint than me. So for example, if I put on, a left-leaning news channel, I might watch it and imagine, okay, if I were a super conservative person watching this, would I be convinced by these arguments with these facts? And I'm not saying if I'm someone who can't be convinced because my mind is made up, but I'm saying if I were someone who's entering this situation with a different bias and a different viewpoint, would this information resonate with me, or would I be able to easily argue against it with their go-to talking points? I do the same thing, if I were to turn on, like, if I were to look at, like, some kind of conservative news source to see what they're saying, and I look at it from my perspective, I could look at it from their perspective and say, okay, what do they like about this? And then I'll look at it from my perspective and say, all right, you know, as someone who has a different viewpoint on this and a different set of facts surrounding this situation, how would I argue against this? So I try to engage with media from multiple perspectives because I think that that's an effective way to try to figure out whether it's doing its job or whether it's only hitting a certain audience. And some media is only meant to hit a certain audience, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. This book does, you know, I talk always about what it says on the tin. What this book says on the tin is A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language. So for the most part, a lot of people who aren't feminists or who don't think that feminism is a good thing probably just aren't going to pick up the book in the first place. So I guess to an extent you could say this is for a feminist audience, but then I looked at it from the perspective as well of like, okay, so I am a feminist already. I believe in feminism. I'm reading this book. However, I want this book to arm me with more facts and more research to be able to convince other people and open up discussions with other people that maybe don't see it this way yet to help that language evolve in the right direction. And I don't necessarily think that this book did enough to give me all of the background information I would need to convince an anti-feminist or something like that. So let me give an example. This book talks a lot about how language is descriptive rather than prescriptive. And I think that that is extremely important because the way that language works is that it works based on how we use it. Language evolves over time. Nothing is written in stone when it comes to language. We can point to dictionary definitions, but dictionary definitions exist based on how we use words. If a word gets used differently, like as language evolves over centuries, if we looked in a dictionary from 100 years ago versus a dictionary now, some words are going to have different meanings because words evolve in meaning based on how they're used by humans. That's why if you look at Old English, it has almost no resemblance whatsoever to our current version of English. That's why you can look at Shakespeare writing in modern English and it still looks very different from our version of English, even though it's technically the same language. It's very different and a lot of words have different meanings, different speech patterns, things like that. Language is not cut and dry the way that numbers are or the way that data are or anything like that. When we speak to one another, we are doing our best to convey a meaning to someone else, and we want them to be able to understand the idea in our head the best we can, and we want to try to transplant that idea into their head, if that makes sense. That's how language tends to work. And I do appreciate that Amanda throughout this book really does drive that point home because it's absolutely true. Now, if you are someone who is on, you know, the anti-LGBTQ side of an issue, or you're someone who, for example, doesn't use someone's pronouns, right? Like, let's say someone says, my pronouns are they, them, please call me they, them. And someone is saying, well, I don't want to call you they, them because I don't believe that's what you should be called. That's very rude behavior. You shouldn't do that. In general, I think you should just respect people. But I don't think this book did a good job of explaining why. And I'm not saying that it's this book's responsibility to tell people why to be respectful of others, but I'm saying that if it is a book that's going to break down a lot of these things from a linguistic perspective, I, as someone who does care about being respectful of the entire LGBTQ community, as I'm part of it, I want to be able to convince other people in my life who might not understand why. I want to be able to point to all the necessary facts and reasoning and things like that. So in the book, she talks about how language is descriptive rather than proscriptive. And, you know, an example she gives when talking about gendered pronouns is she talks about certain languages that actually don't have gendered pronouns. There are some languages where there's singular and there's plural, and you determine which person you're talking about based on context alone, which, considering in English there aren't that many gendered pronoun options, you basically have to judge based on context as well if you're talking about multiple people of the same gender in an interaction. So, I mean, having just one singular and one plural gendered pronoun and then determining things based on context, that doesn't seem that outlandish to me. That could be something we do, but then again, language has to evolve there naturally based on usage rather than based on telling people something.
Do you understand the words that are coming out from my mouth?
Don't nobody understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, man.
She does then have this chapter where she talks about, you know, why it's important to call people by the pronouns that they tell you to. And I agree from a basic human empathy and respect point. But I could imagine someone who is not an LGBTQ ally reading this book and thinking like, okay, so you're telling me I have to use language in a certain way, but you literally just said in the previous chapter that language is descriptive and not proscriptive, and because of that you can't tell people how to speak because telling people how to speak is not going to actually make the language evolve naturally, so shouldn't the language have to evolve naturally there? Telling me to use a certain type of language seems to go counter to the entire argument of the fact that language just evolves based on usage and based on our transmitting of a certain idea. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if that argument makes sense, but again, that's just one thing where, and I don't know how to explain to you why I think, my entire argument of why I think you should call people by the pronouns and the names that they request is that it's nice, it's civil, it's a good way, it's respectful. Like, you want to show basic respect and empathy to other people. You don't want to make people uncomfortable just to be a dick. Like, that's why I say that. But if someone else is reading this and doesn't have that perspective, I can't explain. This book did not give me any points I could use to explain to them from a linguistic perspective why it's beneficial. And I mean, you could easily make the argument that, okay, well, from a linguistic perspective, why do you have to explain that to someone? If someone just wants to be a dick for the sake of being a dick, just cut them out of your life, and we're just going to keep calling them a dick because it has those hard consonant sounds that feel really good in our mouths, and we can just say, you're a dick, you're a dick, you're a dick, because that's more satisfying. Yeah, that's a valid argument as well. But as you guys know, I tend to be a very naive person who wants to engage with every idea and argue with people on Twitter who are arguing with me in bad faith all the time, and every once in a while I do manage to convince someone and bring someone over to a more respectful side of the aisle, and because it happens every once in a while, I'm willing to keep putting up with doing it. And I wish this book had just provided me with more information so that I was capable of doing that more effectively. So that's my main critique for this book, is that if I were reading this and I were an anti-LGBTQ asshole, or if I were an anti-LGBTQ asshole whose mind was slightly open to changing with the right facts and logic, quote unquote, not that they're actual facts and logic, but you guys know what I mean, I'm doing the Ben Shapiro meme, with the right arguments was willing to change my mind or was willing to listen to, quote unquote, the other side or whatever, I don't think that this book would do a good job of convincing me in that case. But then again, I don't actually have that perspective, so I can't tell you that for sure. But I had talked to a few other people, and some other people told me that they felt the same way about this book, that this book kind of assumes already that you are a feminist. Which, I mean, it does say that on the tin, but I think that books that can explain even more and can give even more background, they could just have such a greater impact. It can be even more long-lasting and just kind of take the book to the next level. But that's nothing against the book. That doesn't mean that the book was bad in any way. It's just a place where I think it could have been better and could have gone into a little bit more. Overall, though, I do highly recommend Word Slut. I think it goes into so much background information about the way that languages evolve, about the ways that vocal patterns evolve, and things like that. One person on Goodreads did point out that when she talks about, like, powerful women, like women in power, she brings up, like, Hillary Clinton and Margaret Thatcher and, like, brings up people like that, and people are like, can we talk about anyone other than white women war criminals? And I was like, that's a valid argument. But overall, I think that this book really did have a lot to say about the ways that languages become gendered over time. And I think that this book made one of the best arguments that I'm going to use in the future, which I know I just went on this whole rant about how this book is not necessarily going to help with feminist and LGBTQ issues if you're not already on that side. However, I do think that it gave me one argument that I can really use when in conversations with people who aren't already, quote unquote, on my side about this. And that is when people ask, okay, what is gender, right? There's this whole, like, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro doing their whole what is a woman bullshit, right? People ask, well, what is a woman? What is gender? What is any of this? If woman is a gender and not a sex, what is a gender? What is a gender that makes it different than gender roles? This book makes the argument that gender is not necessarily a biological or a social phenomenon, but a linguistic phenomenon. And when that was phrased that way, I was like, I get it. That makes sense. And I think that, I don't know if that'll make sense to other people. I don't know if that'll make sense to other people who aren't already on board with looking at gender in different ways. But I do think that gender is primarily a linguistic phenomenon when you look at it, because you have this concept of biological sex, looking at things like genitalia and chromosomes and hormone levels and things like that, which you can change some of those things in your body and others you can't change and things like that. And then you have this whole idea of gender roles, which are people's assumptions about what is going to indicate different concepts surrounding being a woman or a man, and you can be outside of those gender roles but still identify with your biological sex and things like that, right? So then people say, well, what is gender if not sex, and what is gender if not gender roles? Gender is linguistic, and I think that that's a very good way of summarizing it, because when you look at these concepts of the masculine and the feminine, a lot of cases these are baked into languages, like Spanish Polish. A lot of languages have like these masculine forms of adjectives, feminine forms of adjectives, then you have masculine and feminine nouns, and that does kind of translate to what we have constructed as this idea of gender is a way to categorize things linguistically. We say words like he and she as a way to indicate something about the masculine or the feminine quality of something, generally a person, but that is being used in a linguistic sense. Because if you look at these whole ideas of like, is a woman a vagina or is a woman long hair and curvy body? Are you telling me that you're going to the Women's Health Center, or are you telling me that you're painting a picture of a theoretical woman that doesn't exist in the real world? That's all very philosophical at this point. But if we're talking about what gender is, I think you could very easily make the argument that gender above all else is linguistic. And if you eliminated all gender from language whatsoever, would gender cease to exist? It might. I don't know. This is all very abstract. And like I've told you guys at the beginning of this video, I often have a really hard time with things that aren't literal. People have slid into my DMs and said, Savvy, you should get assessed for autism. I think I will. But I am curious what you guys think about all of those things. I am looking forward to having more discussions on this book. We had a really interesting discussion about it on Your Morning Guru, so I can link our book club discussion we had about this book up in the cards, where we had people from the chat come on stream and actually have that discussion with us. We're doing a lot more book club discussions soon. Our next book club book that we're discussing on the Your Morning Guru book club is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which I just finished reading and absolutely loved. So be sure to tune into that channel if you want to take part in our book club discussion there as well. I want to know your guys' thoughts on the book Word Slut. Let me know them in the comments below. While I had a couple criticisms, I do still highly recommend this book because I think it has a lot of valuable information, and I think it takes a perspective on gender and feminism and language that I haven't seen in a lot of other books or a lot of other media. So I will see you guys again soon, but in the meantime, please keep on supporting small businesses and don't forget to suck my clit. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.